the legendary Eleanor of Aquitaine. When it comes to great queens, few come close. Her marriage to a duke 11 years younger created a power couple unequalled. She is the mother of two of the most famous kings in history. Her story is one of chivalry, romance, dedication and defiance. She is no kept woman, and her actions against her tyrannical husband would incur a king's wrath. This is her story.
Recap? Oh, I'll check the playlist.
Oh yes, give it a butcher's.
Playlists are fun!
The main problem women have in history, especially in these days, especially in the case of Eleanor of Aquitaine, is that due to the infrequency of records that mention them, they often feel like a secondary character in their own story. Something I've deliberately tried to recreate while compiling these scripts. As sure, I can write the parts that only include Eleanor, but this would leave just fragments without any context or logic, creating only confusion. So, we can piece together her story from event to event as the decades go by, and we can pinpoint her to various locations, allowing us to tag in Louis, her husband every now and then, the King of France, who was a very important part of this tale. They were often together. We know what she did because of what he did, or what other people said. We can place Eleanor, for instance, at Bourges, at the Christmas court of 1145, where their struggling relationship is going to take a fateful turn, adding another nail in the coffin to their rapidly deteriorating marriage, a marriage made only worse by the upcoming Crusade. It starts on the 1st of December 1145, when Pope Eugenius III declares this new crusade to drive the Islamic forces from the fallen city of Edessa. He promises that anyone who takes up arms and fights the infidel should be washed of all sins. Papal bulls were sent all across Christendom, letters calling for a crusade. Then, on Christmas Day, Louis, King of France, publicly declares that he'll take the cross. He'll lead the French armies to the Holy Land. He'll liberate Edessa. He'll lead them to victory. Now all he needed were the numbers. But the shell-shocked royal, more monk than a king, was not convincing anybody. They saw a king not wanting a fight, but penance for what happened at Vitry-le-Brûlé. The screams of the burning innocents still fresh in his mind. He was still having nightmares. Abbot Suger tries to convince the king not to go. Louis doesn't need to go. Stay in France. His heart is not with war in the Middle East. He is no warrior. He's inexperienced and plagued by demons. More, the kingdom needed its king more than ever. He is the last male. There is no heir. And baby Marie, she's not just a baby, but a girl. And only a boy could inherit the throne. The king cannot take the cross because there is no male heir. And should the king die, the kingdom would fall to ruin. This could be the end of the Capetian dynasty. Yeah, not too much pressure there. The king's absence alone also could be exploited by bad actors causing unrest, and Suger was not wrong. Because while the cat's away, the mice play. And France still had enemies, rivals. The main trouble was at the doorstep of France, Normandy and England, but they're already occupied with their own infighting, the anarchy. Even though Empress Matilda was fighting her war with Stephen, Her husband, Geoffroy of Anjou, remained back in Normandy. He's still a problem. Now, the possession of Duke of Normandy is technically bestowed by the French king, as it's a vassal state. Sure, William the Conqueror had some words to say about it, but that was around 60 years ago. The current King of England, Stephen, he doesn't hold Normandy. So, to sweeten relations with his rival, Geoffroy of Anjou, Louis, King of France, bestows the Duchy of Normandy on Geoffroy. I mean, yeah, sure, he's been calling himself that for years, but until now, he's never really held the title proper. Matilda's husband is now the Duke of Normandy, and once again an ally of France. What's more, Geoffroy now sets his eyes on the old Salic law that required a male heir for the French throne, by arranging a marriage between the new royal miracle baby, little Marie, to his young teenage son, Henri of Anjou. Louis is against it, but nonetheless, the deal is on the table. So far, so good. However, Eleanor's own subjects were already protesting. Why? During the First Crusade, only around 40-odd years ago in living memory for many, the people of Aquitaine had joined Eleanor's grandfather, Guillaume IX. Around 70,000 of them were slain. They blamed the French, who had pretty much thrown them under the proverbial wagon, not supporting them whatsoever, leaving them at the mercy of Islamic forces. But the French denied this. They painted the excommunicated the Duke of Aquitaine as a reckless oaf who just didn't understand war. It was all his fault, not theirs. So the Aquitanian vassals are not taking the cross. Having little choice but to lead by example, Eleanor herself decides to take the cross. She'll lead her forces to the Holy Land. If they won't follow France, they'll follow her, the Duchess of Aquitaine. All of a sudden, the unrest evaporated, and her vassals were flocking to her banner. Suja, of course, was having a nervous breakdown. I did not know we could speak Yiddish. Yeah, Suja was having kittens. A whole litter of kittens. Women did not take the cross. It just wasn't done. Yet there she was, the first woman to do so. And Louis wasn't talking her out of it. God no. For a start, the jealous king didn't trust her to remain behind in France while he was gone. She could get up to all kinds of mischief. He also needed the manpower, the troops from her vassals. And even Suja cannot talk the king out of this. Louis is adamant he'll take Eleanor with him. Okay, right. Let's be extremely cynical. It's not like Eleanor was intent on heading to the Holy Land to do any actual fighting. No, she wasn't Empress Matilda over in England. No, Eleanor seems more intent to escape the boredom of France and simply faces a holiday in the sun. At least that's how people were spinning it. There's also her uncle in Antioch. She's not seen him in years. She's also taken her entourage with her ladies, her troubadours, her jongleurs. And there is nothing Louis can do. It is all out of his control. But Suga does have a smile on his face at last, as there is still no great number willing to take the cross, even with the Queen's vassals. French involvement in the Crusade may be called off. At least Louis' involvement anyway. The Crusade may be postponed until another year. Put the Crusade on the to-do list. It can happen another year. But Suga's smile must have fallen when the Pope moves his next piece. Once again, enter Bernard of Clairvaux, the future saint, who has been enlisted to encourage the people to take the cross. Louis, King of France, is by his side. And by Easter 1146, Bernard is the main propaganda piece of the Crusade effort. Bernard faced the crowd. People had come from all over France to see him preach. A huge multitude had amassed in the town of Vézelay. So great a multitude that they couldn't all fit in the abbey there. So instead, the gaunt, thin man, who would one day become a saint, had ordered the construction of an outdoor platform where he could be seen by all. To many onlookers, this would have resembled the Sermon on the Mount, and here Bernard of Clairvaux delivered a sermon of his own. Unfortunately, we do not know exactly what he said, but we know it was fiery. He spoke at length, promising to wash the sins away from anyone present who took the cross. Anyone vowing to liberate Edessa and driving the Turks from the lands. The King of France stood behind him, as did Queen Eleanor. Both were visibly moved by this rousing speech. Then there came outbursts from the crowd, first one, then another, then more. Shouts of, "To Jerusalem! To Jerusalem!" Bernard of Clairvaux had won the crowd. Anything the French king said from here on didn't matter, but actions spoke louder than words. Tears flooding down his face, the king fell to his knees in front of the saint. Eleanor followed suit, openly vowing to take the cross. The crowd was going wild. People flocked to take the cross, joining the crusade en masse. So many that the cloth ran out, that made the small crosses that one would stitch to their clothing. King Louis had the numbers. The crusade was on. Afterwards, Bernard would write to Pope Eugenius. "You ordered, I obeyed. I opened my mouth, I spake. Then the Crusaders multiplied infinitum." His job was done. Now, I will quickly add that some women did accompany their husbands on the First Crusade, but there was a difference here on the Second Crusade. Eleanor wasn't just a wife accompanying her husband, but a queen taking the cross in her own right and taking her own vassals to the Holy Land. By all terms and purposes, she's now a military commander. She's a crusader in every sense of the term. As were her ladies, as Eleanor wasn't the only woman to take the cross that day. Pretty much all her entourage did. Could have been as many as 300 women. And no sooner had they accepted their red fabric crosses, they vanished. Only to appear later, having changed their clothing entirely. Now, we usually take the next part with a large pinch of salt, or a barrel of salt, as it was written a bit later, and there is a good case that someone is telling porkies, and the whole story is nothing but a fabrication. I will tell it anyway, but unfortunately this does fit with Eleanor's character and the absolute silliness of her ladies. Plus, the tale is given by an absolutely reliable chap who knew her personally. Givas of Canterbury. He's the monk who possibly saw a comet impact the moon in 1178. He's not known for telling porkies. He's probably heard it from someone else that the ladies were dressed as... I'll explain. Right. Eleanor and her ladies had vanished, along with their crosses, only to reappear dressed as Amazon women. Eleanor herself played the part of Penthesilea, the Queen of the Amazons, of course. They all wore white tunics with their new red crosses hastily sewn in. Long feather plumes. Each was on a horse waving a sword about. Some had banners, whipping up a frenzy, apparently even throwing their sewing spindles and the like at people not taking a cross. Being pretty much a general pain in the bum. Like I said, a large pinch of salt is needed, but it's not entirely out of character. Anyway. But regarding the Crusade, the kingdom now had a year to prepare. I will also briefly explain the situation backing at Terre Sancti, as the forces of Jerusalem, led by Jocelyn, Count of Edessa, had prevented Zengi's Turks from invading Antioch. Then, in 1146, they had retaken the city of Edessa. So far, they were holding the Islamic forces back, and only a few months ago, the Turk leader had been slain, stabbed to death by a French slave. The kingdom is now ruled by Asaf al-Din in Baghdad and Nuruddin in the Levant, and it was Nuruddin who faced off against this new crusading army. And even though the Crusaders had recaptured the city of Edessa, they could not capture the citadel. Nur al-Din wasted no time in driving the Christians once again from the land, just like his father did. But this time the massacre of civilians was deliberate, as the Islamic forces set the city on fire. The situation was dire. While the Kingdom of France prepared for the upcoming crusade, Eleanor was touring her domains, throwing tournaments, getting everyone battle ready for what lay ahead. Her troubadours roamed the land, a rallying cry that gathered more crusaders by the week. She's even visited the Abbey at Fontevraud, her first known visit to the place she'll be forever connected to, for you cannot mention Fontevraud Abbey without mentioning Eleanor of Aquitaine. Crusaders were flocking to her banner, flocking to the banner of France. Vassals that took up their oaths, vowing to rid the Holy Land of the infidel. But the Duke of Normandy, a Geoffroy of Anjou, he would not be among them, as around this time, due to interference from Bernard of Clairvaux, the marriage proposal between the Norman Duke and the French king was called off, angering the Duke. Geoffroy not going on crusade was very strange, as not only was he a vassal of France, he was the half-brother of Baldwin III, King of Jerusalem. Their father was Fulk of Jerusalem, though there's probably reasons for this, because years later there would be allegations that Eleanor and Geoffroy were, let's say, a bit close. Geoffroy is a model of chivalry, very good looking. He had countless affairs, despite being married to Empress Matilda. He had lovers by the number, bastards by the score. So, was Eleanor really among them, having a cheeky affair behind Louis's back? Oh, a minx! But several important people at the time certainly thought so, including St. Hugh of Lincoln, Gervase of Canterbury, and apparently even the Duke of Normandy's son himself, Henri. Strong allegations. And that marriage that was called off between Henri and Marie, well, Saint Bernard claims consanguinity, meaning he thought they were too closely related, stopping shy of calling her a, you know what I mean? There's a lot going on here. A lot going on. Of course, it could all be a load of porkies, but would be pretty ironic given what Eleanor does after the upcoming crusade. What she may have got up to during the crusade makes you wonder if she did, and many historians assume she had the affair. Anyway, this would be a crusade she'd be embarking on without her handsome vassal. Though, she was still taking all her luxuries and comforts, everything except the kitchen sink, but only because the kitchen sink had not been invented yet, otherwise you know she would. She'd pack the palace if she could. She's taking this very seriously indeed. And during the journey there, Eleanor and her ladies would cause much mayhem, pretty much treating the whole affair like a holiday. They were just as bawdy on the crusade as they were back in Provence, made worse by many a knight, including the king, to abstain from sex during this time. Yeah, let's see how that works out, shall we? As for travel, the French king decided on a land route to get to the Holy Land. 100,000 fully armed crusaders marching across Europe, a journey which would take them first to Metz, where Louis would meet up with the Holy Roman Emperor, then to Constantinople, before finally crossing the sea to Outremer. And in Constantinople, he would meet up with the Byzantine Emperor, Manuel Komnenos, a man only in his late 20s. Emperor Komnenos, along with Eleanor's uncle Raymond of Poitiers, the Prince of Antioch, had been putting the fight to the Turks, but not in the Holy Land, but in modern-day Turkey. And they were fighting not Nuruddin, but Masud, the Sultan of Rum. And the Byzantines were punishing the Islamic forces with a series of bloody battles, falling short of taking the capital. Komnenos is a good general. One day he'll be called the Great. And when Komnenos learned the French king was approaching Constantinople, he retreated his forces to meet them. The war-torn armies of Sultan and Masud probably blessed the ground. They got to keep their city. They got to live another day. In 1147, Komnenos was back in Constantinople to meet the French king and queen who had arrived that year. But when he saw 100,000 unruly crusaders that Louis had almost no control over, he probably grew fearful, especially since many of the crusaders were from the lands of Poitiers. As even though they had both fought against the Turks, Komnenos and Raymond of Poitiers could not stand each other. Adding to this, Komnenos wasn't part of the crusade. He had not taken the cross. He was busy guarding his own borders. And all the Pope's crusade was doing was rallying the Islamic factions into one big fight against the Christians. Muslim leaders, who previously fought against each other, now stood beside each other in one combined jihad. So the sooner the Crusaders were gone out of Byzantine, the better. Also, a 10,000 strong imperial faction under Emperor Conrad had already entered Byzantine territory and begun looting and massacring anything they came across, causing all kinds of havoc. Of course, the Byzantine Greeks weren't taking any of this lip, and now many Imperial Germans lay dead or captured. This is supposed to be a crusade. Even when Conrad was personally escorted away by Komnenos, his retinue rebelled and vandalised their lodgings. Despicable. So, Komnenos had made sure that King Louis promised not to take any Byzantine lands, which he agreed to do so. Which was helpful because the French were finding Byzantine lands hostile due to Emperor Conrad's actions. At least the Imperial army had left for the Holy Land by the time the French arrived in Constantinople around October in 1147. When the French did arrive in Constantinople, the Byzantine emperor gave Louis the kiss of peace, and finally everyone could relax. I will say that it is noted over their travels across Europe that many of the Crusaders had splinters of the true cross set into their sword hilts. Yes, fragments of the true cross of Christ, one of the most holiest relics in Christendom. And the actual true cross of Christ, or a part of it, was currently residing in Constantinople. It's one of their many relics. Another famous relic is the Holy Lance of Antioch, the head of the spear that Longinus used to pierce Christ. It was only found 50 years ago by Peter Bartholomew, a monk. Though alas, the near mythical Holy Grail was still nowhere to be found. It's missing in action. And I'm not going into whether these relics were genuine or not. It is not my place here to challenge faith. Though I will say that in ecclesiastical circles, the Holy Lance was certainly questioned, as even in his own time, some accused those that found it of telling fibs. But either way, the Crusaders were in the city, and it is said to be around 100,000 people. But was it all Crusaders? Did that include the baggage train serfs and the like? We may never know. But in case you are interested, the Byzantines actually make mention of the female Crusaders, noting how these women sat proudly on their horses, clad in armour, dressed like men, and holding lances. They also mention that one of the women was more elegant than all the others. She dressed like no man, but wore a beautiful golden hemmed dress, and held her head high like an Amazon queen of old. Here it is the Byzantines that also call her Penthesilea. This absolutely gives credibility to the scene we saw earlier, when these female paladins first received their crosses before going wild on the streets. Though I can understand their excitement, yet here they were, in Constantinople, in front of the emperor. Here they were, with the male crusaders as equals, on horseback, elegant, with lances aloft. And Eleanor led them with grace. Once they were received into the city and shown their lodgings, Eleanor and Louis, plus the household, settled into the banquet of banquets. Spices from all over the East, food the likes that the French have never seen. Thought, does this mean that Eleanor was partial to a kebab? Because Greek kebabs are ancient, even mentioned in the Iliad, and would certainly be here at the high table. Just not the gyros. That's pretty modern. Also, not the doner kebab. That's a Turkish invention that comes later. Plus, Eleanor would have to wait a few hundred years for the discovery of chili sauce. As for the entertainment, it was also rather splendid, with a good range of skills and shows, from dancers to jugglers. Though Eleanor and Louis did not plan to remain here long. They would be here for just a couple of days, resting after the long sojourn across Europe, before taking a land route into Cappadocia, where they would join Emperor Conrad and the Imperial Army, before heading to the Holy Land, pressing the fight to any Turks they encountered. While recuperating in Constantinople, although the men got to do all kinds of cool things like hunting, the women did not. Instead, Eleanor and her ladies were encouraged to follow the Eastern traditions, thus remained kept away, in their lodgings in the capital. There they were entertained by the Empress, a German woman called Irene. Though thankfully, this was only for a couple of days, which didn't bother the ladies nor Eleanor. Meanwhile, however, the French troops grew restless, and unrest was breaking out. Many cruel punishments were delivered in true Louis style. Yep, he lopped off various body parts, but it didn't help one bit. So Louis made the decision to cross into Cappadocia and make his way to the Holy Land before order broke down utterly. The French king decided to send his main forces ahead to the town of Cadicoy, mitigating the unrest and slowly pushing the crusade forward. As for the king himself and his own retinue, he decided to wait for the Italian army. But that delayed him further. 5 whole days were added to their time in the capital. Plus, when he did finally make his way to join the forces at Cadicoy, Louis would spend almost another week dithering, delaying his rendezvous with Emperor Conrad. All the while, the French army grew more restless by the day. As far as Komnenos was concerned, they were outstaying their welcome. He wanted rid of them. But just as the Crusaders finally prepared to march on to the next town, hoping to press towards Cappadocia, there is a portent in the skies, a total eclipse of the sun that plunged the kingdom into darkness. An astral event that was considered a bad omen by medieval astrologers all across the known world. The French king decides he can't possibly travel in such circumstances, so heads back to Constantinople with a contingent of his men, much to Emperor Komnenos' frustration. Then, in a bid to get the French king to finally leave, Komnenos actually lies to get rid of him, making up a tale that the other emperor, Conrad, with his imperial army, has just won a great battle against the Turks in Anatolia. Yep, off you pop. Bye-bye, good riddance, au revoir. Overjoyed by this victory, finally the French king leaves, soon arriving at the camp near the town Izmit, modern-day Turkey, to join the rest of his army, awaiting the victorious imperial forces. The trouble was, Emperor Conrad had won bugger all, as King Louis had failed to make his rendezvous with the imperial army. The French king was spreading the news of a glorious and fictitious victory. The truth was, the imperial army had been utterly defeated at the Battle of Dorylaeum. Practically all of Emperor Conrad's forces had been wiped out, possibly up to 90%. Conrad himself barely managing to get out alive, and his head was badly wounded. When they finally arrived at the camp outside Izmit, hungry, demoralised, and barely still in the crusade, the truth of the Byzantine deception finally hit King Louis. Now, Conrad and Louis both accuse the Byzantine emperor of deliberately luring the imperial army into a slaughter. More bad news. The Turks are laying in wait for the French army, so they'll have to alter their route, as Cappadocia is out of the question. Instead, they'll head south into Anatolia, making their route along the coast, navigating rough, hostile territory, all the while hoping to evade the Turkic forces of Masud. The journey through Byzantine territory was long and arduous. They had no guides to navigate the rugged canyons of the region, the likes that Louis and Eleanor had never seen before. Morale was low. What's more, for 3 days they had been lost in the wilderness, after failing to find a shorter route. Things were bad, provisions were running low, and many of the luxuries that the ladies had taken with them ended up being bartered with local traders for food. So hey, lucky they brought them along, eh? Women are often blessed with the gift of hindsight, though they probably wished they had the hindsight to have not taken the cross in the first place. As morale sunk to new lows, unrest was breaking out, and the French king seemingly had little interest in controlling his men. After all, he was no soldier, no commander. Emperor Conrad regarded Louis's arrogance as beyond the pale. Though unfortunately, Conrad was too ill to continue, so headed back to Constantinople with whatever men he had left. Many others had already deserted. Rains would not stop falling. Many horses were drowned. This wasn't a crusade. It was torment. The only ray of hope came when out of nowhere the Seljuk Turks of Mas'ud attacked the Crusaders. But they weren't facing Conrad's imperial forces. They were facing off against the best knights in Europe, France's finest. The Turks didn't stand a chance. Driven from the field, sent scattering to the hills. Wasting no time, the French captured their camp and looted it, replenishing their own supplies. It was the kind of miracle they needed, giving them new resolve, enough to push on to the town of Ephesus, where they set up camp. Still the rains fell, still the rivers flooded, still people died. But even though Christmas in the year of 1147 was spent in hell, the Crusaders could see a glimmer of heaven. After enduring 4 nights of this, King Louis makes the decision to press on directly to Antioch, the fastest route, over the Phrygian mountains, dangerous territory, where they were routinely harassed by the Seljuk Turks, who cowardly kept a distance, bombarding the Crusaders with arrows. Eleanor and her ladies could no longer ride on horseback. It just wasn't safe. Instead, they resorted to hiding in wagons, protected by thick leather curtains, easily enough to stop the many arrows. And at night, they slept in well-protected tents, before doggedly pressing on the next morning in a hurried race to get to Antioch. As the crusading army crossed through the mountain pass, Louis makes the decision to split his forces, sending a vanguard to scout ahead and set up camp on a plateau, one that came before a rocky pass. Here the king planned to join them later. This vanguard would be led by the Geoffroy de Roncon, one of Eleanor's many vassals. Also, Eleanor herself, along with her ladies, will accompany them. Yes, Eleanor and her Amazons are in the vanguard, the front line, not held back in the rear. They will leave their valuables behind with Louis. These women are looking for a scrap. But later, when the king arrives at the plateau, Eleanor, the vanguard, the camp, was nowhere to be seen.